If you want to sing, one of the first questions to ask yourself is why? Because if all you want to do is sing around the house just for the heck of it, it doesn't matter how you sound. I mean, it really doesn't. But if you want to improve your sound, if you want to sing professionally, you're going to want to know what you're doing and how to do it and why. That's what this series is all about. So before we even think about stagecraft, character, interpretation, style, let's master the most crucial variables of vocal production, namely breath, resonance, articulation, and pitch. I nearly forgot. Because most vocal issues will fall into one of these categories. By the end of this series, you'll have the tools to be able to address them. You'll also come to recognise that none of these variables exists in isolation. Where one's deficient pulls down the others, but where one's optimised, it supports the others. But for the sake of learning, it is useful to define them separately, and I'll further subdivide them into little bite-sized pieces, so there's absolutely no mystery about what we're doing. And of course, we're not talking about some quick fix or some little trick. We're talking about building a voice to last a whole career. So do watch these videos in sequence, because we'll build one skill on the next, or one skill on another. Better way of saying it. And before we start, there are literally thousands of vocal exercises out there. So what you'll see here is not the only way of doing things. But as long as you understand the core concepts behind them, the why we do them, you can swap in and out the actual exercises. In fact, I encourage you to do that. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep challenging yourself. So today, let's start with breath. Everyone breathes, right? I mean, it's automatic, so what's the big deal? Well, for singing is much bigger, much more intense than everyday conversation. So it stands to reason that the kind of breath we take when we mumble our way through the day is just not going to cut it for singing. And when you think about it, breath powers the entire mechanism. So it's our first level of control, and that's why we start with breath. Without breath, the vocal folds can't vibrate. Without vibration, there's no sound. This first concept is about body awareness, and it's as much about removing obstructions as it is about finding strength. And posture is not about standing rigid like a soldier. On the contrary, it's probably more akin to the martial arts concept of a relaxed readiness. And I'd know about because people are always telling me I look like the sporting type. If I had $1. But in our case, for singing, posture is really about how we support that effortless passage of air. So let's start on our feet, because when you're standing, it's much easier to adjust your posture. So find an even stance, about shoulder width apart between your left and right feet. Even placement between your toes and your heels. And let your knees just be slightly soft. If your knees are, you don't have to be bent, but if your knees are locked, your hips are probably going to be locked. That translates up the spine into stiffness in the neck and probably tension in the throat that we just don't need. So shake it out if you need to. Stretch to find that easy, connected length through the body, as though you're hanging from a string, as opposed to collapsing under gravity. If you're a dancer, this part will probably come second nature to you. If I slump in the neck, for instance, you can immediately hear the tension in the sound, but just simply by lengthening the neck, it already sounds much more natural. So try that with me. This is how it sounds to be slumped, and this is with a more natural passage of air. I mean, that's so far pretty easy, huh? And notice too, if I'm slumped in the neck, I'm probably slumped in the chest, which will severely limit the lungs' capacity to expand. So keep it nice and long. So what we're looking for in posture, as with all of these techniques, is to optimise the mechanism, but also remove any barriers to our best sounding voice. Now, in meditation, you may have been taught to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. But for singing, sometimes the nose is just not a big enough hole for the amount of air that we need. It's not that we should never breathe through the nose, but whenever you need more breath more quickly, the mouth is going to be the better option, or at least the more efficient option. So let's take a deep, slow breath in, and it should be almost silent. So breathe with me. Breathe in. And breathe out. And keep the jaw quite loose. If you hear a or a there's probably too much tension in the throat and the larynx, and we'll touch on the larynx in another episode. One way to counter this is simply to move towards a yawn position. So even if you have to fake a yawn, move towards a yawn position. That really just means that the soft palate, the back of the throat, is slightly raised. The back of the tongue lowers slightly. And if anything, draw the tongue slightly forward. That'll create a little bit more space in the back of the throat, which again in the next episode will become really important for resonance. So have a listen to the difference. First of all, with the tongue pulled back. How dull that sounds compared to the tongue pulled forward. Much more open sound. So try that with me. First of all, with the tongue pulled back, and use a mirror if you're not quite sure what's going on. So breathing in. And the tongue pulled forward. So zen. If you've ever done any kind of drama before, somebody's probably said to you, breathe into the belly. We don't breathe into our belly, our lungs are up here. But we do displace the contents of our abdomen to accommodate the expansion of our lungs. And this is where dancers could find it challenging if you're used to holding firm in the midsection. So for this exercise, don't try to look svelte. Don't hold that tummy in. We need that space. So let's come back to our deep breath. But what I want you to do this time is notice how once the belly expands fully, how the lower ribs sway open to accommodate that full breath. And you can really only feel it once you breathe in super deeply. Oh, and by the way, don't lift up your shoulders. We don't breathe into our shoulders. They can stay flat. So breathing in, ribs sway open, and breathing out gently. And we can isolate that even further, because sometimes we need a full, fast breath quickly. And if the ribs are already in the open position, then the muscles of the belly move much more quickly. So we're going to breathe into the belly, sway open the ribs, breathe out in the belly, and then let the ribs go. So we're going to isolate this time. So let's try it again. So think of your posture, loose jaw, nice easy breath. So we'll breathe into the belly, breathing in. Ribs expand. Hold the ribs open, breathing out. And let the ribs go. Now, you may not need to do this kind of isolation all the time, but when you do need it, it's a really useful technique. Okay, so while we're on a roll, let's add one more element. But this time what we're going to do, we're going to breathe in again as deeply as possible, but we're going to do it with the throat staying open as though you could pant if you wanted to. Because if you just clamp the throat shut, you'll never engage the muscles that actually do the work. So we'll breathe in and hold with me. Throat open as though you could pant. Snatch in a little bit more and hold. And you might notice that some of these muscles are starting to do some work. And hold and breathe out. Good. So this exercise not only helps you feel the muscles that engage, but also helps strengthen and control them. Some people describe the lungs as a set of bellows, but to my mind it suggests that there's an even expulsion of air, an even effort to expel the air. And that's not quite how the body works.
No, members of the jury, I put it to you, we are more like a dingle-dangle. A balloon.
Maybe we're more like a balloon, where as we expand our lungs... What? I'm not an animal. That natural tonus of the muscles and the air pressure around us forces out a certain amount of air with absolutely no effort. But there is a little bit of air left, and that's where our muscles have to engage. So I want you to try this with me now, and what I want you to notice is that moment of transition between the ease of the natural expulsion of air and when the muscles take over to squeeze out every last drop. Cubic centimetre. So breathing in, expelling, forcing the rest. Okay, so how does this impact sound? Well, if we take a deep breath, and I start to talk, it sounds relaxed and normal and pretty easy. But as I start to approach that point where the muscles have to engage, you can start to hear the tension creeping into the sound of my voice, where it's tight and squeezy, not so easy. Not very pleasant at all. So what can we take away from this?
Mais oui, je suis un ballon. 10 points.
But yes, I am a balloon. 10 points. Too much Eurovision. The point is, the most useful part of the breath is that full to naturally empty part. The rest of it we can think of as our emergency breath. It's not that we never use it, but it is much more prone to tension and doesn't have that same sense of ease or control as the full breath. So before I give you some tips, let's review the 3 core concepts from today, because we'll touch on them again in the other videos. So first, we're optimizing our posture. Second, we're creating a bit more space in the throat and the mouth, moving towards that yawn position with tongue slightly forward. And third, we're prioritizing that full part of the breath for ease and control. Tip number 1. Technique is about lots of small things that add up to a much bigger picture. Now, this is not the sexy stuff, this is not the glamorous part of singing, but in the longer term, it really does make a difference and it really does pay off. So keep reminding yourself, our first priority is effective, efficient, reliable technique. Jennifer Hudson didn't start out sounding like Jennifer Hudson. That takes time. Tip number 2. If these ideas are all new to you, it's probably a lot to take in all at once. So don't try to do them all at once. Start with the first exercise until it becomes second nature, even if all that is remembering not to slump in the neck. Then add the next exercise till that feels second nature, and the next until it all feels intuitive. Because what we're doing here is building good habits. So if anything doesn't make sense, come back and watch the video. I'll be here. Tip number 3, you don't have to spend hours doing these kinds of exercises. You could do them while you're doing the dishes, driving the car, waiting for a bus. I mean, I wouldn't do them on the bus because you look like a crazy person. But if you can do a couple of these exercises, even for a couple of minutes, a few times a day, you'd be surprised at how quickly you can master them. Now, if any of this has been helpful, or if it's raised any questions, do leave a comment below and subscribe because, YouTube. And when you're ready, join me in the next video, Resonance, where we make actual sound. So until then, remember the best vocal exercises are not the ones you know, they're the ones you actually do. Deep. I mean, that one's a thinker. Actually, no, it's not. It's just true.